Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about the future of sustainable mobility. While the entire world is talking about clean energy and EVs, this topic is far more important and relevant for India. More than 1 million people in India died due to air pollution. Just for context, around 150,000 people have died in India due to COVID, and the entire nation went under lockdown for 3 months. If we take this problem of pollution with as urgency and seriousness as we have taken COVID, I'm sure India can lead the world in transition to sustainable mobility. And to achieve this, we need a collaborated effort from various segments of the ecosystem, including startups, vehicle manufacturers, operators, investors, and the government. On our panel today, we have representation from each of these segments. I would like to introduce the panel starting with Honorable Deputy Chief Minister of Karnataka, Dr. C.N. Ashwath Narayan. Dr. Narayan is the Minister of Higher Education, Minister of Electronics, Information Technology, Biotechnology and Science and Technology, Minister of Skill Development, Entrepreneurship and Livelihood, Government of Karnataka. Our second panelist is Anita George. Anita is Executive Vice President and Deputy Head of CDPQ Global. CDPQ is global private equity, infrastructure and real estate investor with over $300 billion invested across 60 plus countries. Our third panelist is Vignesh Nandkumar. Vignesh is a clean tech investor and was partnered with LGT Lightstone Asparta, a global impact fund where he led the environmental sustainability focused investments into electric vehicles, renewable energy, and shared and circular economy. Our fourth panelist is Vibhuj Binani. Vibhuj is an aerospace engineer specializing in sustainable zero emission mobility. Vibhuj co-founded BTI, an electric mobility OEM that designs, develops, and manufactures EVs. Vibhuj also co-founded Collect Express, a sustainable mobility logistics platform. A very warm welcome to all our panelists. The panel will be moderated by Vibhuj, and I will let him take him over from here. Thank you, Vibhuj.
Thank you, Krishna. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, based on which time zone you are. So this is a panel on the sustainable mobility future of India. And the way this is going to be structured is we're going to set the stage and then move on to each panelist for their perspective on their role in the ecosystem. And then we'll open it up to Q&As to the audience. So a big part of what's happening in the world is this entire transition to EVs. And everyone is talking about moving to electric vehicles, electric zero emission mobilities, fuel cells, technologies coming in to disrupt the transport sector. But to really understand what that is and what that's going to look like is we have to understand it's not just a simple transition to EVs, but it's actually an energy shift. So we're moving from a fossil fuel based energy system, combustion based engine system, to something that's completely new, to a different energy itself, which is electricity, and a different delivery system on how we get the energy to the user and how we utilize that energy to create some useful efforts, such as just moving your vehicle. And this is something that we're seeing after 100 years. It happened before in the 1920s when we shifted from animal-based transport to mechanical-based transport. And that shift took place in about 15 years up until 1935. I think most of the first world economies were mechanized, and we had complete mobility with cars, with the Ford company coming out, with various other companies, Daimler's coming out with their first version of the trucks. And in that side of things, we actually had to build refineries, build pipelines, build gas stations to get the brand new energy system that was fossil fuel new at that time over here. Advantage that we have today in India and the world globally is that we already have the power plants, we already have the grid, we already have the grid connections. Now, the question is, how do we get the last mile of this energy transition, which is the vehicles and adoption of these vehicles by the consumers? So to come to India, more specifically, we have about 24 million automobiles sold every year. About 80% of them are in the two-wheeler space, 3.5% both in commercial vehicles and three-wheelers, and somewhere around 13% in the passenger vehicle space. So having these various segments, what is the low-hanging fruit for a country like India to transition to EVs? Is our transition going to be similar to what's happening in Europe, in China, in North America, and Latin America? Or is it going to be something different, something homegrown, something made for the country. We don't know which solution which can fit in. The various panelists will discuss their perspective of it. So with this framework in mind, I will first move on to an operator's perspective, moving to Vignesh. So Vignesh, as an operator, how do you envision a fleet transition to electric? What kind of challenges do you experience and have you experienced in operating an electric fleet and expanding your electric field? And a third part, what I would like you to also touch on is, what do you think is India's biggest advantage in this entire global electric mobility uh, revolution that's happening?
Thank you, Vibhuj, and good morning, everybody. Good morning also to my fellow panelists, Deputy Chief Minister and Anita. Um, it's it's very topical because suddenly the newspapers are full of the petrol has touched this number, that number, but you have to break down that too. It is not everything under the control of the government. So everybody's talking about electric now. So I think you guys have hit the right time and the note. Um, so Vibhuj, from a transition perspective, there are 3 or 4 aspects that have stood out for me over the last few years while both investing and looking into the operations. Right. One is that you're right, and all of us recognize that this is not merely a technology transition in mobility or transportation. It's not a BS4 to BS6. It's not a go from non-leaded to leaded or leaded to unleaded petrol. It's an energy and transportation transition. Therefore, when you look at it from an operator's perspective, the first thing that comes to mind is who's going to solve the chicken and egg problem, right? So you go and say, hey, come on, go electric. It is good for sustainability, but A, it has to be economical and viable, right? B, somebody has to be able to provide the energy. It's a fantastic idea that this energy transition allows you to charge from anywhere, right? It can be in your home, it can be when you're shopping in a mall. You don't have to go to a certain place. The energy comes to you literally, right? But then it's not so simple, right? The grid has certain codes, it has certain restrictions. So the whole thing comes down to who's going to break the chicken and egg problem, right? Add the financier's perspective to it. And they're going to say, how do we de-risk these various things, right? And I would, while we are looking at what's happening in the rest of the world, I would also look at what did India do right in some of the other transitions that I think we have managed quite well. One of them being in the energy space itself. It is well accepted now that India is fairly ahead in the renewable energy transition. And we have stuck to our commitments given at global forums and perhaps even looking to exceed. And even certain states like Karnataka, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu are going well beyond their renewable energy obligations. And what worked there was twofold, right? One was that there was a degree of deliberalization of the generation aspect, right, that came up. Second was the government could play, and government agencies, people like the NTPC, NVVN, and then subsequently SECI, could play a significant role because there was a monopoly around energy procurement. Now, what can we do in parallel in transportation, right? And that is where I think we see a number of schemes that the government has done, whether it is the FAME subsidy or even for manufacturing subsidies, deliberalizing the charging infrastructure, licensing requirements. I think they're all steps in the right direction. But the fleet operator is still faces the challenge of how do I put all of these together? How do I get the financing in place? And that's where I think one of the first things that we did was to work with large balance sheet companies, large MNCs, and say, you have an obligation, you have committed to go to a sustainable energy situation as far as your footprint is concerned. And how can we go touch upon that not only from an electricity perspective, from a transportation perspective? And therefore, for me, the biggest challenge now is driving adoption, right? I think it has gone well beyond proving that the idea works. It's gone well beyond saying, can the technology work? And it's gone well beyond saying, can India make it work, right? So I think now the question is, how do we drive adoption? It is capital intensive, and I think we are at a stage now where we do need to see some amount of both risk capital and infrastructure PE type capital come into the mix. Right? Lastly, I think your question was, what can we do, right, in a way to be a leader, right? One of the things that we learned from the solar revolution that we faced was, how do we, as the country, and then as any large market would think about it, de-risk your supply chain, right? Because one of the things that still happens in solar is that a substantial amount of this is imported, right? And de-risking supply chain needs a 10-year view. It's not a 5-year view. It's not a 2-year view. And therefore, trying to drive down to merely a L1 type scenario is not going to help, right? Because what will happen is, in L1, you have to take the benefit of economies of scale. And today, to be realistic, we don't have that in India, right? Second, you need to be able to say, in order for me to deliver L1, I need to have control over various pieces. And again, we don't have that in India, right? One small minor disruption in the Chinese Ocean, the supply chain will get disrupted. So I think that is something we need to seriously go beyond just thinking from a lithium strategy, but also all other pieces. What can various small, medium, large size industries be given? And I have some thoughts, we can discuss that later. And I'm sure you have an OEM perspective as well. The second is that, to accelerate adoption, we have been seeing the first steps in the right direction, as I said, in terms of the FAME subsidy. It's certainly focused on quality. They don't want to subsidize cheap Chinese substitution imports. That's certainly been the stated policy, which is good. It's focused on cost, but we also need a significant additional driver in innovation, right? So what are things that we can do there? And lastly, can we think of financial instruments? And there was a very good Rocky Mountain Niti Aayog Institute report released about 3-4 weeks ago. It, I think, addresses phenomenally well the challenges in accessing finance for electric, right? This is not just about e-rickshaws or two-wheelers. It has to be at the ecosystem level. And therefore, I believe there are some instruments possible there, and that's something we should talk about.
Thank you, Vignesh. So you spoke a lot about the government's.
Vibhuj, I think you are on mute, or I can't hear you.
Am I audible to everyone now?
Yes, you're audible to me.
Okay.
Great. So thanks, Vignesh. Wonderful insights. You spoke a lot about a parallel between solar and EVs and how the government's a large procurer of that. With that, I would like to move on to the Honorable Deputy Chief Minister. So we are seeing this massive EV revolution happen everywhere. Certain countries are saying they're just not going to allow internal combustion engines be sold in any form. Certain major global corporations like GM, Ford, Volkswagen saying they're going to stop doing that in the next 15 years. So we see this massive opportunity. As a representative of the government, how would you ensure that India, and specifically Karnataka, which has always been the cradle of engineering in our country, takes advantage of this opportunity? And what do you think would be our greatest advantage from a state perspective as well as a country perspective in participating in this entire global ecosystem of energy transition?
Namaskaram. Good morning to all the panelists and the participants, and good evening to the people participating from the North America. I would like to appreciate the conference, the virtual conference on this subject, on the electric vehicle and the sustainable mobility. In this aspect, Karnataka was the first state to come out with a policy with regard to the electric vehicle and energy storage policy. It was, even today, it is very well ahead of other states and country with regard to the policy. As a whole, as a country also, the Honorable Prime Minister time and again has made it very clear that we should not depend on the fossil fuels. we need to be self-reliant and to counter all this kind of price escalation, to make it very sustainable and affordable. And this is the way forward to address many concerns, particularly in urban area. With regard to the pollution, it's been very challenging. So keeping in mind in all these aspects, and more so, we are surplus in electricity production. Power, we are surplus. Probably if you look at in the state of Karnataka, we have a capacity to generate 25,000 megawatts, but we are producing only half of it. Since because of the consumption issues also, we have a lot of challenges. And along with this, the kind of innovation happening in the Bangalore city, in the state of Karnataka itself, the Bangalore city itself, if you see a lot of innovation is happening, there are more than 45 startups are there. The companies are located here. There are many companies already have come out with a lot of innovation, and a lot of products have already come out. It's already, they have started manufacturing. They have started manufacturing in a very big way, in lakhs and millions. And it is getting ready. And all the products got developed, and the manufacturing process also has started. And with regard to all these aspects, everything is ready. Even the government of India and government of Karnataka, we are totally exempted all the taxes. And we have made it very affordable to buy an electric vehicle, to make it sustainable, cost effective, and whatever required infrastructure with regard to the charging of the electric vehicle facility. Also, it has been made mandatory in most of the places. Most of the places, they need to provide the electric vehicle charging facility in most of the big buildings, malls, metro stations, the apartments, malls, IT parks. Everywhere it has been made mandatory for them to provide. And more so, we are providing subsidy also, particularly for the electric vehicle charging. We are trying to subsidize, and we are now trying to develop many more facility across all the main highways, so that they will not be put into any kind of inconvenience. And most of our startups also have come forward to have a swapping facility. Now the vehicles also will be sold without batteries. Even they don't have to pay for the batteries. They can rent it. They can with a very affordable cost, they can get they can rent the batteries, so that it is made also very affordable and practical. In these aspects, probably many more companies are still in the pipeline to invest and develop more electricity producing renewable energy. There's a big queue more to have 1,000-2,000 megawatt renewable energy to be put up. They're interested to put up all these plants to generate power. But since we are having surplus, we are now trying to control the people from investing on these aspects. And we are surplus, and so all these factors are very conducive. And as you already, Vignesh has pointed out about the FAME also is an excellent policy where we are trying to give a lot of subsidy for the public transportation also. Many of the existing vehicles also, the retrofitting is happening. Retrofitting and changing the existing vehicle. Even in government, we have a policy down the line to completely replace all these vehicles with electric vehicles. Even in government, at least next down the line 2-3 years, we want to at least minimum have 50% electric vehicles. So all the way, we are looking forward for the complete the entire, all the vehicles will become electric vehicles probably down the line next 10-15 years. We can expect the only presence of electric vehicles on our roads. So with these few words, I would like to stop here. And all the things, I think it is conducive, and even the planning in the integration or planning or implementation also, we have already, Vignesh pointed out with the Rocky Mountain Institute, and many more institutes have been working in with the mobility implementation. Urban mobility labs have started, and they've been working in this direction. We have been facilitating. Even people have been, they have been adapting or buying electric vehicles as they are concerned for this environment, and they want this is the way forward for the environment to be addressed very effectively in all the major cities and in all the places across the country. So this is something which has been encouraged by, as a whole, by the society, government, from all the stakeholders. And most so, the entire ecosystem has been built very strongly in India. Even if you look at the lithium battery manufacturing also, already we have given permission for the manufacturing two plants in Karnataka. Lithium battery manufacturing will be, starting in a very big way, not only catering to the local demand, it will cater to the entire world global supply chain also. So many more manufacturing companies, Ola and Ether, Mahindra Electric, Yulu, and many companies are there. They're already into manufacturing. So it's all the way. We can see in the matter of time, it will be a big transition, probably better than any country. We can expect the state of Karnataka is very ahead of many of the people, and it will be the happening place for with regard to all the verticals, not only electric, all the verticals. We have been doing well, and probably the prospects is better and very futuristic. The Bangalore has become the most happening place in the entire
Thank you,
world.
sir. That's very insightful.
Thank you, Vibhuj.
Hello.
Yes, yeah, I would like to stop here. Hello, Vibhuj. Hello, Vibhuj.
I think there's some connectivity. We'll just wait for a minute.
Yes. Hello.
Hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, Vibhuj. Yeah. I'll stop here. I'll stop here. So. Like to hear from other panelists.
I think Vibhuj's connectivity just dropped off. Probably give him a minute to join back. But maybe in the meanwhile, I can just add, or Anita, would you like to add something?
I think Vibhuj is back. Let's wait for him to come in.
Yeah, Vibhuj is back.
Okay, sorry about that. Small connection issues. So this is the new normal. I'm sure everyone has experienced this in one form or the other. So a very warm thank you to the Deputy Chief Minister for giving us a very in-depth view of what the government is doing in various forms and various sectors to make this ecosystem a success. So moving on from the government's perspective, I would like to go to an institutional investor's perspective. So Anita, clearly we're seeing that EV sector is capital hungry. And there is a lot of investments being planned out in the EV or ESG investment perspective, particularly your organization, which is very heavy and aggressive in green tech, green investments, a sustainable and a carbon-free, carbon neutral at least economy. So what do you see is as the major roadblocks which is preventing many other organizations and large capital institutional investors from flowing into this sector to establish a baseline? And how do you plan or how do you foresee us financing the sustainable development and the sustainable investments?
Thank you very much, Vibhuj, and a warm hello to the Harvard community. Thank you to Krishna and yourself, Vibhuj, for inviting me. And I'm very honored to be here with Deputy Chief Minister from Karnataka and Vignesh on this panel. And actually, even in this short period, hearing both Vignesh and the Deputy Chief Minister, I think you've done very well in identifying the three key pillars of the EV sector taking off. So, of course, the government and the government policy, government incentives, and then we have the VC ecosystem, which I think is very, very important. And you represent, Vibhuj, the OEM approach, another important component. And all of you have mentioned the charging infrastructure, Vignesh mentioned the supply chain. I think a key aspect is also the financiers. So just to start with, you mentioned CDPQ, we are Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec. So from the name, we are the second largest pension fund in Canada from the province of Quebec. And I always say to my team and to myself every day, we have to think about whose money we are investing. And 340 billion Canadian dollars is really the savings of ordinary citizens of the province of Quebec. And therefore, we have to make sure that we bring reliable returns to our pension depositors. So starting from that premise, I'm addressing your question, and in some ways the analogy to the renewable energy sector I think is very relevant. So I was privileged to finance the first megawatt of private solar in India. That was back in 2009, and I was part of the International Finance Corporation. And I remember at that time, the solar mission had just come up. Solar policies were yet to be really framed. And different states were coming up with different feed-in tariffs and support to the industry. Since then, we've seen this huge revolution, I would say, which has really made renewable energy not just grid parity, but even cheaper than conventional fossil sources. And a very simplistic analogy that I will draw is when EV reaches that stage where they can really give the run for the money to ICE, that's when you're going to see the big transformation and the big capital that's coming into this sector. And it's not that long a period, because if you see now, today, renewable energy is one of the most sought after green sectors. CDPQ ourselves, we are one of the largest equity investors in renewable energy, with about 20 gigawatts financed across the globe, including in India. So the starting point, I would say, really is our own backyard. So we've begun in Quebec. We are, in fact, sponsoring from soup to nuts, from conceptualization to implementation, a light rail project, which is electric, and will connect the airport of Montreal to the city, including suburbs. It's 100 kilometers with about 46 stations. And this project, in fact, was designed to demonstrate that through public-private partnerships, we can bring in institutional capital. There's contribution from the Infrastructure Bank of Canada, as well as from the provincial government of Quebec. So I think this partnership between institutional investors, financiers of projects, as well as from the private sector, as well as government financing, will be important and critical to get this sector off the ground. Another aspect that I would draw an analogy to is really creating the ecosystem. And Vignesh mentioned supply chain. If we take a leaf out of the book of when Maruti came into India, or really took off, when Maruti took off, one of the big things they did was the vendor development program, which actually spurred the auto component industry in India and created many, many manufacturers who fed into that ecosystem. A key part which people don't remember or tend to forget is the role of financing. And the role that Maruti as a large OEM played was to get financiers to finance this supply chain by saying we will provide a guaranteed offtake of products of a certain quality and quantity, etc. And a lot of startups who today are large companies like the Asahi Glass or Motherson Sumi all came up out of that vendor development project. So one of my suggestions from the financing point of view would be really to create this ecosystem of the supply chain charging stations by bringing the financing community and the OEMs or the beneficiaries of payments from consumers together, so that what would otherwise be a challenging financing situation, one can really break through and create that ecosystem. Another very important aspect, I think, is the fact that there would need to be a lot of government support initially. And if you look at the 10 largest countries for EV, starting with Norway, China, the US, Germany, Japan, etc. And India is one of those 10. The incentives from the government, both for manufacturers and for consumers, so tax breaks for consumers, as well as support in all aspects for manufacturers, the combination has been really the trigger for attracting more financing into this sector. Another important aspect for the innovation and the disruption of traditional, manufacturers. So what I see is, and I'll share with you my personal experience. I wanted to buy an EV car when I moved from the US to India. And honestly, it was so difficult because people had diesel models, petrol models, but EV was either outrageously expensive or just not available. So I think that availability and the larger OEMs shifting to EV will be a very big incentive for consumers to start seeing EV as a tenable proposition. The second I would say is really the charging infrastructure. And here I'd again like to mention CDPQ in Canada. We've actually created a physical space for our VC financed innovative startups in charging stations, in components. So Canada, as you know, is a big auto component market. So for example, the ignition for EV cars, we have supported startups that have developed really path-breaking technology in these areas. And as well as the whole ability for fleet managers. So we are a financier. We've invested $50 million in Bird, which is an EV scooter. And that has really been experiment, which of course the COVID has also disrupted. So we need to again look more from a longer term perspective as to these investments which can disrupt traditional models. The way I see it in India is that there's going to be, there's going to be really the bottom-up kind of innovation in India, where you already see it in the two-wheelers, three-wheelers. And my assessment in India, given that we're a country which really looks for value for money in consumption, that we are going to see consumers coming forward really from the bottom up. Younger people, millennials, the fleet operators, this is where I will see the big change rather from top down. And from a financing point of view, once it becomes more mainstream, there will be more and more appetite globally for not just institutional investors like ourselves who are committed to green, but all financial investors who will see this as the way in which the industry is going. just as we did in solar. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Anita. That was very nice, and I do agree with you on a few of your most of your points actually, especially with India being a very different approach compared to what Tesla did in the US or what other OEMs are doing in Europe. So, talking about that, speaking from an OEM perspective, we at BTI have been focusing on creating the value rather than on cost, because this whole pursuit of parity is quite challenging, is finding out what parity means, as EVs are 30 to 40 times cheaper to operate than a comparative ICE vehicle. So how do you define, how do you quantify what price parity between an ICE and an EV is? Is it over the upfront capital cost, or is it over the total life cycle cost? Is there a way that the two can converge and find an equilibrium for creating a win scenarios for both an operator, a consumer, a user? Who is the ultimate beneficiaries, and can the benefits be split as per the degree of participants? And that's, as an OEM, our biggest challenges that we are facing, at least in India, is that we are importing our innovation today. Other than just products, we are forced to buy something which is designed somewhere. Even if you manufacture it here, it's designed outside of India. Most of our systems, be it the various power electronic systems, be it whether it's battery modules or battery cells. So for us to create something which is specific for the Indian consumer, which is a beast of its own, a very different price conscious, a very different value conscious, a very different spending power that the Indian consumer has, or spending priority that the Indian consumer has, is in order to do that, in order to cater to that, we need to have a product built in India, for India, and by India. You brought a very, very nice example of Maruti and how it spurred on the entire automobile revolution over here. That did not happen until they created an India car. Before Maruti, you had the Padmini, you had the Ambassadors. That was not able to do that because, again, we imported the basic models, did the Indian jugaad, as I would call it, and localized it for the Indian market. Localizing a product, a mass market product, is not a solution as an OEM. We think we have to do something ground up, and hence you need to be vertically integrated to then develop your vendors. And a part of that is bringing in vendors from other streams. So you bring in vendors from the power sector stream to come and help you to develop the chargers. You bring in the vendors from the service sector stream to come and help you develop a vehicle which can, create an ease of use, create a high degree of comfort to cater to an audience which is, the 90s kid, as we call it, because that's the largest consumer demographic of our country. How do we capitalize on a demographic dividend in our country? So unless we internalize our innovation, and then as a step to internalize the production, those are the two main requirements for India to be self-sustainable. And I see the government doing a lot. They have a product-linked incentive scheme. They have various subsidies that's given both from the demand side, which has now spurred up demand. Two-wheelers, we have so many two-wheeler OEMs, we have so many three-wheeler OEMs. That's because of the very large FAME subsidy that's come in, which is transitioning consumers to electric, educating consumers about electric. One of the things that I would suggest, if the government could also focus on, is that we now need to incentivize the innovation. We need to incentivize the startups, because even if you look at, let's take the biggest shining example today, Tesla. Tesla was a startup, and because it was a startup, it was able to create the revolution to electric. It was not GM, it was not Volkswagen, it was not Ford. None of these guys started the whole electric car industry the way Tesla did. So we do feel that as an new energy system, as a new technology, it's always going to be the startups which will take the plunge, because they have fewer constraints. A large OEM, any of the large OEMs, most of them are public companies, so they have shareholder constraints, they have board level constraints. A startup is really driven to survival, driven to innovation. And in that system, they are, if they don't innovate, they're no longer in existence the very next day. And hence, we need to incentivize that. Uh, Policies such as government procurement coming in for EVs, they act as the base demand, which can possibly incentivize venture investments into startups to then, provide the capital to innovate. So this is a perspective from OEM is we need to start locally innovating, locally building and designing the products in order to reach a parity. Having said that, I would like to uh, move to ask Vignesh a question. Is you have said that you see the energy delivery system happening, and we have the honorable deputy CM saying that there's a big mandate to have malls, corporate offices, public parks, put these chargers, put the infrastructure over there, and the government itself is moving a lot of its public transport to EVs. A lot of we've seen Minister Gadkari speak about having various ministerial departments move to EVs. So we are seeing a government being an anchor consumer for electric vehicles, for the technology, for the energy. As an operator and the government being a consumer, how would you, satisfy the demand, and how would you work with various companies who can help you satisfy the demand? Because it's not just the government's job. The government is spurring the demand. It's creating the opportunities. Now the private sector fulfills the opportunities coming from a venture investor yourself as an operator. How would you approach that?
Yeah, no, I think I'll take off from one point you made. It's just not the government's job, and I completely agree, right? Because we tend to think, oh, and I've spoken to a lot of investors and even large OEMs. They say, let the government come and put charging infrastructure, then I will manufacture, right? This was the chicken and egg problem I referred to. I actually believe that in the case of this particular transition, the sustainable mobility transition, the private sector has a much larger role. The government, of course, can provide the right incentives, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you see, compared to solar versus transportation, while the government is a large anchor client, from a country perspective or even a state perspective, the government procurement of transportation or its share in transportation is less than 25% of the all transportation needs that are met in a particular state, right? Whether it be people or freight. So the private sector has a huge role to play. The second is that when we think about what is missing today is, you go back to the point that Maruti assured that I will provide a certain offtake, right? And I do believe that the challenge in electric is not that on a per kilometer basis in operations, it already beats ICE, right? The question always, like in solar, like in storage, is how do you amortize the large upfront cost, and how do you de-risk the residual cost? I mean, this is where the challenge of transportation lies today for electric. And therefore, for me, one of the ways that this plays out really well is fleet operators being at the right front and center of this transition. Because for personal mobility to take off, and even Tesla as an example, yes, it was very innovative, but they invested billions of dollars before they sold their first car. And the Indian capital system is not like that. So we shouldn't even think of what is the parallel, right? The risk-taking capability is not the same, right, in the Indian capital system. So the depth of our markets, everything is different. So let's look at what works here. So one is the bottom-up innovation that Anita mentioned. However, what I've seen in the bottom-up innovation is they're small ticket sizes. So for a financier, it becomes expensive to do that. We need to hit the large ticket sizes, which is public transportation, which is the larger form factor vehicles. And in my mind, I think one of the agendas you wanted to bring up was the entire freight transportation, the LCV. It is a large contributor to pollution. It affects millions of lives from a livelihood perspective. And by the way, in value is much more massive, right? So in that, how I see these various participants coming together is the fleet operator and the financier are right front and center. And if the government, and this is just a suggestion I'm throwing out here, today we have the benefit of two innovations that did not exist even when the solar revolution happened. India has one of the best digital payment systems in the world, one of the best, right? on the layers of UPI, on the layers of payment banks. There's so many things that have happened in India that did not exist. So therefore, your friction in financial payment and collection is far less than it used to be when 10 years ago. The second advantage we have is data. Our data costs are one of the lowest in the world, and the electric vehicle is a connected vehicle from the get-go. So is it possible to marry these two things and come up with a scheme? On the one hand, yes, there is fame and there's a demand side on that, but all of them are still largely capital based, right? It is per kilowatt hour of battery. Can we do something that goes to per kilometer of electric driven, right? I'm just throwing it out there. And is it possible? I think with a little bit of pulling of these innovations and the startup ecosystem that we are talking about here, it is possible. But that sets up in alignment with the OEM, with the consumer, with the fleet operator and the financier, right? You have these revenue-based lending models. That is the Maruti equivalent, I believe, for electric revolution in India, right? All the pieces are, and I'm just throwing out the concept. I have seen a few angles there, but yesterday I was in a conversation with somebody who has presence in 1,000 locations in the country, and they asked the question, how do I monetize if I want to get into electric charging? How do I monetize it? Because I just don't see load. And I think the private sector, pulling in the private sector participation by incentivizing the per kilometer, which then actually nicely amortizes the large upfront cost, right? So that is how I see as a fleet operator being able to take advantage of the charging infrastructure. And trust me, the Indian businessman and the average person on the street, even those driving the truck, know their economics really well. They are very smart. So if you make these things happen, they will adopt, right? And I go back to saying these are the things that we need to do to accelerate rate of adoption. I do believe charging infrastructure will be a public-private partnership. It cannot be just solved by the government. And I do believe incentives can be aligned for real estate and for the charging infra providers through the fleet operator and the financier model. So that's in a nutshell how I see the Maruti equivalent playing out.
So we have a few questions from the audience. So some of them you've addressed in your response, Vignesh. So we have, I think, take one very pertinent to what we see here. So we say, how important is data from EVs, and how does the livelihoods, how does it affect the livelihoods of drivers? So I have a small perspective on this. Is as an OEM, we make trucks, we make electric trucks, and electric trucks coming in from drivers' livelihood, it's really good because it actually provides inclusion. EVs are basically direct drive systems. You don't have a gear, you don't have heavy steering systems. It's easy to do. So one of our last mile trucks, we've seen a very large uptake of women drivers coming into our into the workforce because of this, and that gets them very, it provides a level of social mobility because it provides them a level of confidence of, they're doing something. It provides them amount of financial independence, and it gets them exposed to, professional environment that, a different job segment, which is primarily male dominated. And, it's life changing for them when they feel that they can do something, as good as a male counterpart in the last mile delivery system. So some of our trucks was the biggest surprise that we got, that an EV is so easy to drive in an Indian traffic environment. Indian cities are notorious for having someone come in from the left side, come from the right side. Following traffic rules is a matter of opinion, rather than as a requirement. And so how do you create a product which is easy? And I think EVs is doing something of that. So to the person who asked the question, how does it affect the livelihoods of drivers? It's a very positive social effect. Then coming up from Vignesh, we are already beating ICE on a per kilometer basis. So in the freight industries, the drivers, the operators, the adopters of EVs actually have a higher earning, and a more sustained earning, because you are freed from this daily price revision of petrol and diesel. You don't know what the price is going to be tomorrow, day after, and henceforth. So coming from if you want to take away the uncertainty of your cash flows, this is the best policy to go on, is to just to go to EV, because your energy prices are virtually fixed. You can predict what your cost is 3 months from now, a year from now, even a couple of, even over 5 or 10 years from now, you could fix it as a power purchase agreement. So we see a higher increase in your earning capacity. We see greater addition of your workforce. We see women coming into the workforce. We see first-time drivers coming into the workforce. We could see college students participating in the gig economy with electric bikes. That comes in because it's easier for them. They use it for both their own transport as well as the final delivery. So there's a large impact on the entire ecosystem of drivers. Uh, so my question, we have another question from the audience is, how do we ensure that in parallel transition to EV, we have a clean energy transition to power the EV stations? I mean, this is a big concern that everyone has. You're moving to electric, you're moving, you're going to use electricity. What's the source of this electricity? What is the ultimate carbon footprint? So I'm going to open it up to Anita, because you're a very large solar investor, and I'll take it to the DCM after that.
You, Vibhuj. I think that's a very, very relevant question, and that's the question we are tackling in terms of the energy transition itself. India has set very ambitious targets, and as was mentioned by the Deputy Chief Minister, we have moved ahead in terms of even achieving those targets. I think some of the more recent moves in electricity, like bringing in private sector involvement in the distribution sector, these are all good news for that transition and transformation. Because at the end of the day, investors will come in and finance where they are convinced that there's predictability, there's longer term contractual agreements that are honored and not changed, and the fact that there is enough stability in the sector for them to bring big capital. For an investor like us, those are some of the must-haves before we can move ahead with large financing, bringing volume financing to the sector. On the power side, I think the link between the batteries, both in terms of providing storage, which addresses the intermittency, as well as the fact that you could use that innovation also for your EV. I think bringing down the cost of batteries is going to be critical for the transformation in both sectors, both in the power sector as well as in the mobility sector. And the last point I'll make is, you've seen a big splash of India's focus on hydrogen, which is seen as yet another transformation, which will impact both the electricity as well as the mobility sector. So these are all developments which I think will take us, and clearly both sectors need to have that transformation. So no quick or easy solutions, but I would say the trend is definitely moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Anita. I would like to have a question to the Honorable Deputy Chief Minister. Sir, two questions for you from the audience and one from the OEM side. Is, as an OEM and as a representation of the startup community, we see a lot of the EV startups in Karnataka primarily because of the talent. We have so many engineering colleges over here, very reputed colleges, and EV is a talent-hungry business because of just creating the new product, creating new engineering. What would you envision for Karnataka to capitalize on this? We did it with IT. We became the world leader, not just the country leader. How can we use our engineering talent pool in this state and the wonderful ecosystem of colleges that's built here to do something similar in the EV sector? And so a second question on that segment as well is coming to the charging infrastructure, where you've made policies for putting up in malls, in apartment complexes, and in IT parks. How do you power this? Is there ways to marry rooftop solar, marry localized production and distribution of clean energy, incentivize entrepreneurs to come in and put them in and create a PCO type of a model or any of that sorts that the government envisions to, have this wider adoption of the policies that you've put in?
Vibhuj, the state of Karnataka, the Bangalore, along with the local talent, it has been a more of a convergence of talent from across the world, from across the country. It is a most cosmopolitan city and a state. It's basically, you can see India in the state of Karnataka and Bangalore. It is not just local, to repeat again, the talent from across the country. It is the convergence. And it's the most happening place with regard to all the aspects, with regard to the venture capitalists, the talent, or the startups, and even with regard to the policies. We've been always, facilitating and encouraging to the startups to grow much bigger with various programs, as you rightly pointed out. Encouraging startups in the initial stages is very important. So in this direction, we were the first people to come out with Elevate, wherein the startups could, get the seed money, the grants, not equity, it is the grant which has been given to the startups, and it's been encouraging, and we have been facilitating in all this direction. And with regard to the ecosystem, with regard to the almost, it is very conducive. Even if you look at the numbers, it's been growing in a very big way. The adoption in public transportation or in the retrofitting or prospectively with regard to the buying of the new vehicle, electric vehicle also, it's been happening in a very big way. Even the costs have been coming down drastically. The capital cost also has been coming down, and it's if you compare with few years, it was been a very high cost. Now today, every day it's been sliding. The costs have been sliding, and more so, even the system is built such a way, as you've been pointing out, with regard to the design and manufacturing. The design also is happening here. Even the manufacturing is happening here. Only thing is we need to further scale up in a very big way. We've been doing it with regard to the source of energy. Already we have surplus. Surplus, and many more with regard to the clean technology, with regard to the power generation. It's more and more. It is only the renewable energies only have been encouraged, and more so the people who are coming forward. It's only mainly in the area of renewable energy, the thermal and all. It's not been much encouraged now. Whatever is existing itself, managing and maintaining them itself is a big challenge, and renewable is become the way forward. And we have many investors. Still we are having many investors with regard to the renewable, but still because of the surplus production, we are not in a place to encourage. And with regard to all the rooftop and everything, whatever so far has been allowed itself, it's a big number. And no more so now at present, we're more insisting that, for the local consumption, for the individual consumption, the rooftop concept, even now it has been encouraged and subsidized for them to have a self-consumption in each and every household or each individual level for the institution, and they're more for the individual requirement also. And whatever surplus, we have been taking it to the grid. So each and every member of the society, they've been allowed to participate, and rooftop concept has become the way forward for us to withstand many of the peak hour demand, and all the peak hour aspects also has been kept in mind. And in days to come, it will become more dynamic. The dynamic changes will happen very effectively. The market dynamic changes only can lead us now. So the entire government, probably in India, Honorable Prime Minister has all been talking about the market dynamics only, the dynamics, the privatization, encouraging and opening up. It's not the same old government. We have been so positively opening up. Not in any other government across the world can think in these terms. They talk always in the terms of conflict of interest. Here is a state or a country where we allow the entire industry to be part of the government with one intention. Only the market dynamics can only sustain, because the competition is so much. We need to encourage, celebrate entrepreneurship, any new things, innovation. Innovation is the way forward for any of us to sustain and to make a sustainable growth. This is the way forward. We strongly believe from top to bottom, or bottom to top also, it is the same way forward. We'll facilitate all these changes, and More so, whatever the source of power or the facilitation or the charging, every possible aspects have been effectively addressed. And more so, we can keep on improvising with regard to the charging facility or many more things. And even the government has come forward to set up initially, so that the initially it becomes difficult for any player to come and set up, because it is a matter of cost, it is going to burden them. So initially the government itself is coming forward to install all this facility, and gradually will allow the private players. This is the way forward, which will happen. And with regard to the battery manufacturing, also it's happening in a very big way. And even we are trying to lithium mining, also we are trying to find the source in our country where we can get the with regard to the cobalt mining and the sourcing also. And some of the mining areas across the world also needs to be, the source also has to be taken up, because most of the source has been taken away by our neighboring countries. So we are also in this process of looking, encouraging more of capital investment. Probably in a matter of time, all our energy and sources will also get channelized with regard to the investment for the big companies or the tech companies for the product development. How much we invest, it is less. We need to bet on all these things. As a country, we keep betting in many other aspects. Even the entire society, all the people's savings needs to be channelized. We are coming out with better option and products. Probably it's a matter of time. In all revolution, all our people, we are caught up with the entire world. When it comes to the digital, the money is from more from outside from than inside. So we'll ensure that also will happen. We'll encourage and create a lot of awareness among our people to come and invest more and more their money in the digital revolution, which is happening in a very big way in our state. And in this direction, we have been trying to connect with each and every institution and people. We want it to happen in a very big way. In future, probably will not be looking elsewhere for the sources. It will happen all inside from the state. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we're running out of time, so I'm going to just give every panelist a very short time. Please keep it like within a minute or two for closing comments. Anything that you would like to sum up our discussion, sum up your perspective on the sustainable mobility future of India. Anita, I'll start with you. What would you like to, what are your key takeaways from this panel, and what do you, what are your next, if you had 3 steps to do to promote sustainable mobility, what would your 3 steps be?
Thanks, Vibhuj. I am very, very excited and encouraged by hearing both Vignesh and the Honorable Deputy Chief Minister and yourself. Many of the points you made on commercial vehicles, very exciting. I really do see that the sector is at a cusp where financing will take off and take off in a big way. We have to join the dots. So Vignesh mentioned bringing the financiers, and we saw this in the traditional auto sector, right? Auto finance is something which came up not that far before. So I think the same thing can happen, and it should happen. The second thing I would say is really creating the ecosystem end to end, from the VC financing for green and deep tech to the larger consumer financing right across the supply chain, right to the consumer. That would be very, very important to really make this mainstream financing.
Thank you, Anita. I would go to the Honorable DCM. So, as Anita has also said, that we started solar 2007, 2009, where the first private megawatt come in, and we're in 2020. And today, like you have said many times on this panel, is solar is oversubscribed, if you would want to use the market term of it. In a period of just a decade, if you would put it. How do we do that with EVs? I mean, if we can do it with solar, with low infrastructure manufacturing and EVs where we have a much higher, stronger position, how can we could we do that in the next 5 years? And could Indian OEMs join their global counterparts and say that we're going to stop manufacturing diesel and petrol and we're just going to go to EVs? Can that happen? If it can, how would you, sir, as a Deputy Chief Minister, champion that cause?
Vibhuj, basically, already many things have happened in this direction. A lot of progress has happened, and things have been moving very fast. So, further to add much more encouragement or the facilitation, already there's a lot of competition among many states to hold on to this, and the manufacturing has started in a very big way. The Ola has come out in a very big way for the manufacturing. Even the Ether has done it in a big way, Mahindra and all companies, Hyundai, and even the whatever required components or the batteries, everything will be manufactured in-house in the country itself and in the state. And more so, as you required, the most important is the energy. The energy is surplus, and even the people who are involved in this area, because they know this is the way forward. If the country has to become self-reliant on energy, we need to encourage, we need to get away from ice, and we need to encourage the electric vehicle. This is the way forward. This is what has been envisioned or visualized by our entire government across the country. So we are for it, and we have been encouraging, and much more, as you rightly pointed out, innovation needs to be promoted in much more bigger way. The design and the manufacturing, everything should happen big way, and the capital, whatever required. And further, already we have given a lot of incentives and subsidy and the policies. And the policies also we have come out in a very big way. All the stakeholders, not just one stakeholder, we are trying to bring in all the stakeholders, let it be the public transportation system, that the power generator, or the infrastructure, the manufacturer, the innovation, the technology, all possible people we are trying to bring under the one platform to facilitate and encourage. We have a roadmap very clearly. It is only electric vehicles. Even in the fleet of the public transportation, we are trying to bring all the electric vehicle, and we need to become much more clarity. Instead of importing all these vehicles, we need to have the local in-house, the locally manufactured companies should be encouraged. So some initially we are trying to work on some of these gray areas are there. So the clarity will come out. It's a matter of time, but it will be the happening. And so as you rightly pointed out, and it is the ease of driving, everything comfort is there, the speed, the initial pickup, everything is in this vehicle. So all good for all good reason, electric vehicle is a way forward, and it has got no disadvantage keeping in mind all the aspect. Let it be all the aspect except for the initial now capital cost. Probably down the line, even that will come down, and it will become the preferred choice. And infrastructure also will be built across the state and country. And we have been working, and will further hasten this process and ensure that this is the way forward, and electric vehicles will become the mobility vehicles. I am 100% sure. Matter of 10 to 15 years, except electric vehicle, nothing else will be there.
That is very encouraging, sir, to see this level of confidence. It's inspiring as well as encouraging. Thank you, sir. Vignesh, you've seen institutional investor very happy about putting in large money, looking for large money. You're seeing a government being so proactive. I'm pretty much run out of time. Can you summarize? I'm sorry for giving very short time to summarize, but what would be your takeaway in about 60 seconds?
The takeaway is the time is here and now, as everybody has said. This is both India's opportunity. All the ingredients are there. I'm extremely bullish, as with the panelists. That said, when you have the rubber hits the road moment, you have to do the right things. I think the intent is all there. The actions are going on. What I look forward to is how we marry these things, both from a government and private sector perspective. And I'm hoping that we can actually capitalize this as a country. Unlike some of the electronic manufacturing, things that we have seen move away from India, this is a great moment for us. We have all the ingredients, and really looking forward.
Thank you, Vignesh. I would really like to thank all the panelists, Honorable Deputy Chief Minister, Anita, Vignesh. Thank you for joining. Thank you to the audience for coming in different time zones. That's wonderful. We can see your nice enthusiasm towards this subject. It is a very important subject. And, as they say, we are the first generation to know all about climate change, and the last one which can do anything about it. So it's in our hands. I'll hand it over back to the Harvard team.
Thank you, Vibhuj. Thank you so much to all our viewers and our panelists for joining us here today. This was indeed a very interesting discussion. We have a bunch of interesting discussions also lined up for you. So please go ahead, check them out. The details are on your screen. And to log in, please go to india-conference.com. See you there for the rest of the afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Harvard team and everybody, and lovely interacting with all of you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
See you.
Thanks.